we're sending a small group to the boundary waters of Minnesota.
There is snow, there is ice, the conditions are hard.
This group is walking 10 miles, carrying 6 days worth of food.
I can't see straight. I just had a panic attack.
From here on out, we're gonna have a different perspective on everything.
Center for Alcohol and Drug Treatment, this is Christine. How can I help you?
My name is Drew, and this is Nick and Dennis, and we just completed a documentary called Walking on Ice. We just did our first premiere out in North Bend. We had 180 people show up. It was really cool. It's been a project that's been in the works for a year now, a year and a half even. And these were the two guys that teamed up with us to make this all happen. And I think it's pretty incredible that the three of us we're able to pull something like this off. And the reason for this podcast and just to talk with you all is just to kind of dive into some of the stories and hear what the process was like from the filming side, from the editing side, from the directing side, and just dig deeper into how this all got pulled together.
There's a huge story here that I feel like the camera missed, maybe even. I mean, making a documentary takes a lot of work, and there's so much that happens behind the scenes. So I'm excited to talk about it and figure out, okay, kind of bring people into the story of all the different things that we experienced while making it and, what this all meant for us.
Yeah, I mean, this was my first project that was this was a 65-minute feature. We've done short films before, but this was my first big documentary project that actually got, put out into the theaters and hopefully making it to Prime. So this was definitely an experience and definitely learned a lot from this whole experience. But first of all, how did you all know each other? And then honestly, how Dennis obviously made a big connection, but then how did you guys get connected with me?
So Dennis and I got connected a few years back working together, and then we've kind of just stayed working together on a lot of cool projects over the last couple of years. I guess when was it, 2023? You were like, hey, I'm working on this documentary, or I've got this documentary I've been kind of, gearing up to shoot. So that's how I kind of first heard about this project. And then, fast forward a couple months, I get connected to Drew. We start talking about the project, and he's like, hey, would you be interested in editing this? And then that's kind of how I got connected in on this.
Yeah, well, to throw into that, I mean, I was talking to Drew about this documentary, and we were kind of deciding okay, what are we gonna do with the edit? And I know, Drew, you started working on it, and you told me, man, this project is a beast. It's got so much in here. And I'm like, well, I know a really great guy. His name's Nick, and he's done a documentary before, and he's just a super talented editor. So I was like, this would be a perfect connection to make. So I'm really happy that Nick joined in, because I think he was the missing piece of the puzzle for this project and really helped take it home. But yeah, as far as how Drew and I met, I had known about Drew for many years, and I was working in a similar field. And once I decided to start my company, I was reaching out to other people, reaching out to other creators, and just kind of just essentially networking, but trying to get different perspectives on the industry. And I DM'd Drew, and I'm like, hey, let's get together, let's talk. I want to hear your thoughts and see what you're doing these days, because I'd seen your work for so long. So we finally met up and got lunch at Matador, and then from there it was just two people that were in the same field, and I feel like we understood each other well. So we had a pretty good working relationship after that. But
yeah, I want to talk about how it came to be, then how you guys came into it. How this project started was it was going to be following 3 events. It was a trail run, a mud run, and then the expedition out in Minnesota. And I wasn't actually able to make the first one, which is the mud run. So I called Dennis. And then so I knew that he had the red setup, which is obviously how we were filming it. So I called Dennis. I was like, hey, Dennis, I need you. And was it two other guys, right? Who were they?
It was Tate and Victor on the first project. That was the mud run, right?
Yep. And so I wasn't able to make it. So I called them to go out and get the footage for it. And they did a killer job. They had to run the mud run with the cameras, which is insane. The Gemini and the Komodos, I mean, it's crazy town, but they did it. They made it awesome. And then we filmed the second event, which was the trail run. It was a great filming experience. We got a bunch of stuff. It was after that then we kind of talked, we're like, there's not really a strong story here right now, which is why it took such a dramatic change in terms of diving into the personalized stories of the people that went on this expedition, which is completely different than what it was set up to be. But then anyways, after all that, there's a point of like having done so much of the filming, being at all the events, being in Minnesota, where I did want to edit it. And, you know, I knew the story, I knew the people, and I wanted to do well by them and create this impactful piece. And so I think I talked to you multiple times without bringing you in yet. And it was like this conversation was like, maybe we'll do it, maybe not. You know, still I want to do this, right? I wanted to have my hands and my control on it. And then finally, I told Dennis, I'm like, this is massive. I mean, we took it this different direction, and now it's huge, and I need help. Like, I definitely need help. There's no way that I'll be able to run Freestyle production and be able to do this all at the same time. And so that's where Nick finally, I think it was like I was like, Nick, I need you like now. Like,
are you available?
Let's
I'm
do
like,
this.
yes.
Yeah, come out here, let me show this project. And this was a learning experience for me in terms of letting go of some things, especially a project that was this big, and giving it over to you. And I think it made it so much better because you were able to put in that creative thought and take the footage that both Dennis and I filmed and piece it together in a way that was new and fresh. And I think, and it sounds like you had a great experience editing it, where for me, it would have been a little bit like pulling hair because there's too much of everything else going on. So bringing you in, man, and collaborating with other creators and letting go of that control was such a great learning experience for me. And I'm so happy that it happened, because I think this is going to turn into other projects moving forward. And just the fact that it's like, you can trust other people with your creative projects, and it actually enhances your creative projects, which is so incredible.
You mentioned the moment when it became more of a story, diving into people's lives versus just kind of filming events that were unfolding. When did that decision to switch the storyline take place? And like, how did it happen? Because I know you had conversations with Recovery Beyond prior to, you know, filming, and you guys were kind of coming up with a story. What did they want, and how did you evolve it into the story that it became?
The person that brought us on, that really was pitching the story, her name was Megan with Recovery Beyond. And she was there for the first two events, but she actually ended up having a health situation go on where she was hospitalized for a long time. And so she ended up having to leave Recovery Beyond to take care of her health. And that's right after we filmed the two events. And I called her after looking at all the footage, and I was like, hey, Megan, I know you're no longer like at Recovery Beyond, but I think we have to take this a different direction, because originally the plan was to film it kind of like a game show where these individuals had to go through these two hard events, the mud run and the trail run. And if they didn't pass these tests, then they weren't going to go on to the expedition, right? So that was the storyline we were going with. But after filming it, it felt like, you know, the story just wasn't there, and there wasn't a big why or big impact piece. So that's why I called Megan. I'm like, we gotta do individualized stories. We got to go out and, you know, engage with all of these individuals and find out the why behind why they even doing something like this. And she said, again, she was out basically hospitalized. She's like, do it, run it, like do whatever you think is going to make this the best possible documentary, and make it happen. And then, so I was like, okay, done. And then, so I just started going off on my own and contacting everybody, and they were all open. That was another incredible piece, is everybody that was part of this project, all the individuals that we followed, were so open to getting interviewed and having me come into their lives and talk with them at their homes and dive into some really kind of intense questions about their past, where they came from. And after the first couple, it gives me goosebumps just talking about it. I'm like, this is what we have to be doing. And it changed the whole game. It changed the whole thing. And I feel like doing some of those interviews prior to going to Minnesota, we established that relationship with them, which then allowed them to feel more open with us with a camera, because it's tough having a camera in your face, right? What Dennis and I did really well is we established those relationships where we would talk with them, engage them off camera, make them feel safe, but also make them know that we have the best intentions, right? We're not going to just I don't know, make crap up or whatever to get the drama piece. And I know there's a piece of that that's like at play with creating, documentaries, or that you look for the drama points or whatnot. And things did happen, things did occur, but we didn't go out of our way to make unnecessary things happen. And we created a safe environment for them to know that, hey, we're going to be truthful, we're going to be honest, we're going to capture it with our best intention and be ethical about it, which is another thing that I learned in this whole process about, being ethical. And it's towing the line and finding out what's appropriate, what's good, what's healthy for a documentary and the storytelling, and what's too far, what's too much. There were some things that happened that was too much and was not appropriate, and we cut those out. We did not include those parts of the story because it wasn't right. It would have been drama for drama's sake and not for the story's sake.
Mm-hmm. I mean, listening to people talk about their stories was a heavy topic. Like talking with these people, hearing their past, hearing where they're at now, and being in recovery it's still a difficult thing. Like they've kind of come out of this season of their life where they're ready to move forward, ready to push forward, but they have this past and they're learning how to deal with it, right? And so diving into those stories was, it was kind of a difficult task to figure out, okay, how do we navigate this well, and how do we ask the right questions? How do we, be sensitive to their stories and be respectful of their experiences while being able to tell the greater story, which is, recovery beyond what they're about and these people's stories in that recovery process. So I think, sharing those stories have been really impactful for a lot of people. And even talking to some of the people at the theater release, they felt so impacted by what they saw. And I think that so many people are going to feel the same way when they see it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yeah, just to share a little bit about what that story was, is with the individuals that we followed, they all came from pretty tough upbringings, pretty tough backgrounds, whether it's, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, or a lot of family abuse. And really this story showed people that they can do extremely hard things, which was this expedition in Minnesota, which was an incredibly challenging for, people to go out and do, right? And there's one line in the documentary, without giving too much away, there's one line in the documentary actually by Tommy that's like, if I can do this is gonna change my perspective on everything that I do in life.
We got this to compare the rest of our life to. Like if anything comes up, we can be like, oh wow, that's nothing compared to that week out there on the ice.
Right? That's nothing.
Because living in recovery is hard. Living every day, it's a battle of not re-engaging in the previous lifestyle. And the fact that they can do this, it was laying a foundation for each of these individuals, a strong foundation where they can stand on and be like, I can do this. To be able to have that as a person, like if I can do this, I can do anything. We all have these foundations that we must come from and deal with tough situations. And this is one of those experiences for them to show them how much more they can do. And it is incredibly impactful. But Nick, I know you had to edit and you didn't know the story, so you were coming across the stories for the first time.
What first drew me to the project is Dennis was like, yeah, we're going to Minnesota, we're filming these people, they're gonna go on this kind of like really challenging excursion. And so I'm like, okay, like very curious to hear more about what this entails. But then kind of like once I started talking to Drew and learning even more about it, it seemed like a really interesting idea of following these people who are on recovery as they go on this super hard expedition basically in Minnesota. And I think it's funny that you bring up that quote, because I think that quote is like so crucial, and so maybe just like a central theme almost to the whole documentary of like pushing yourself to the limit, and then once you're getting to that limit, just knowing that if you can do this one thing, like you can overcome other hard things in your life. So like, I think that was a really interesting part of the documentary as a whole, and just you really see that play out throughout it of these people who have had just really hard upbringings, so many challenges in their life, and yet they're still willing to challenge themselves even further, to push themselves even further so that they know they can overcome these other hardships in their lives.
To kind of tag on top of that, why did we name it Walking on Ice? And I think this is another pretty cool analogy, is there's a line in it by Taylor, which is one of the individuals that we followed. And it was filmed with a GoPro, and they were going to sleep one of the nights, and they were on ice. And Taylor looks at the ice and he hits it.
I thought that this would be considered dangerous.
I know. This is ice.
But that's the thing about perception. Sometimes you think something, right? But you don't know unless you do it.
So that's where the walking on ice started, is like, yes, doing these hard things, progressing in life, or doing something that you never thought was possible is scary at first, but that's just the perception. Once you get going, it changes the game. It changes your life.
That's pretty mind-blowing. I didn't even know why we named it Walking on Ice, but hearing your explanation was like spot on. I feel like that's the perfect metaphor.
Yeah, so yeah, I love, man, it just gives you, I've been having goosebumps this whole time. Just, man.
I have a question for you guys. What was it like going to Minnesota? Obviously, we're here in Washington. You had to travel over there. It's super, super cold. Like, logistically, what was kind of the preparation for that in terms of like getting camera gear over there, planning like how you were going to shoot the expedition? What kind of did that involve, like on your end, Drew, and getting that all set up?
Yeah. Dennis and I kind of got together because it's like there's an element of you have to pack light because you are moving, you're hiking out and finding them and whatnot. So we had to pack light, and we brought quite a bit of gear. We actually did bring 2 camera setups, which we used for the first bit, but once they went out there, we ended up just sticking to 1. So Minnesota, where we were at the Boundary Waters, and typically it's like -14, -20 degrees every year, and just crazy snow. Well, operating cameras out in that type of element can be very difficult because batteries can die out really quick. So we were pretty nervous about that. But what was wild is that that year that we went, it was 0 degrees rather than -20. And the snow was a whole lot less, which actually worked in our favor because typically they are bundled up to the nines where you're only seeing like this much of their face. But because of this year and how it was, they actually were able to have their full face showing, which I thought made it more personalized. It was like, we were almost bummed that it wasn't what it normally was, but then at the end of the day, it actually worked way better for us. So we ended up packing up drones in the Red Gemini to go out there, and everything just worked perfectly. Tons of batteries and whatnot. And
one of the instructors even had a t-shirt on.
Yeah.
Like, she was so used to the cold that she was like, oh, this is nothing.
Everybody's bundled up. She's out there in a t-shirt. The interesting thing about documentaries, when you're filming, you have to be outside of what they're doing. And I think Dennis and I could have actually done even a better job at this because it's so hard that when things go wrong, you want to help out, right? And so they were deadheading or grabbing all these, the dead branches and whatnot to make a fire. Dennis and I were just out there sleeping, like under the stars, on the ice, just laying down. And it was incredible.
We did not contribute.
We did not contribute
to the collecting of wood.
Because you're not supposed to. There's one event, and it's actually in the documentary, where we were filming. The instructor set up a pot of water, which they put up these big sticks, and then they hang it, and then they light this fire, and they boil the pot of water. Well, it tipped over.
Just that we're gonna have a giant fire.
And Dennis and I were filming it, and we ended up catching it. That decision is such an interesting concept when you're filming a documentary, because had I gone back, I would have had a conversation with everybody and said, hey, we're gonna be filming, but when things go wrong, we are actually not going to jump in. So we did catch it for them and help with that, and we had to stop filming and whatnot, and you could kind of see it all happen. But in reality, we should have let things occur, let that happen. But it's so funny. It's such a small decision.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, it's like, that is how you must interact with the group. And it's sad, it's hard, but that's kind of a thing that I learned.
It would have changed the whole night for them if it tipped over.
If that tipped over, that would have been an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, because the water would have spilled all over the wood. The fire would go out. They would have to go collect more wood again and come back, rebuild the fire, fill the pot again with water.
Which they were drawing from a hole that they, hacked away 20 meters out.
But for me, it was almost like just second nature to put my hand out and make sure that it doesn't fall.
Yeah.
Because I saw it falling. I'm holding the camera. I'm like, oh, it's falling.
Yeah.
And then I realized in that moment, wow, I just impacted their whole night. And we're not capturing the story as it would have occurred if we weren't there.
But had that have happened, you have to have that conversation with the team before, in which we did not. Because, you know, you're just not expecting for something like that to happen so close to you. But that's something moving forward that I would do and say like, hey, I'm gonna feel really sorry when this stuff happens, but we're gonna step to the side, you know?
Was there anything that sticks out to you, Drew, throughout it that you were like, oh, like, this is like a really important part in the documentary. Like, I really want to make sure we touch on that. Was there anything playing out when you guys were in Minnesota that you were like, we gotta have this in there?
Oh yeah, and there's tons of things that happened. I remember when Dennis and I were filming, and I don't want to give too much away in this conversation, but there was individuals that out of nowhere would start sharing stories, and me and Dennis were just filming, no idea that things were going to come up. And so there was multiple times where we were filming and Dennis and I would just look at each other like, what did we just capture? Like, this is pretty crazy. Like, this is wild. Months after, before going to editing, I kind of forget some of those moments. And then you brought them out, which is like, oh my gosh, I forgot that we filmed that, like that happened that way. Again, it's like I got to relive it twice. But again, it was an emotional experience because it's a tough topic that we were following. And so some of those things that happened really had it took an emotional toll to follow those stories and hear what was going on and, you know, see people crying over what was happening. But oh yeah, there's lots of those experiences. Yeah.
There were so many conversations that we had. I remember like in the car or going to our cabin at night about the story and like, you know, discussing the different topics. I feel it really helped us figure out where to focus our attention, right? Because we're essentially living the story, but our cameras are capturing it for the audience. And so making that decision, you know, talking about what we're experiencing, what we're seeing these people experiencing, and then working that into the story and working that in through the camera was such a cool experience for me, just to see how like all of this was unfolding. You almost have to just figure out how to document it. And, you know, I feel like all of us kind of come from a different spot where we've worked on commercials and social media and different types of like marketing videos, right? Where you almost have to stage it and tell a story and like in a way where you're putting it together, right? You're directing it, you're leading the story for the viewer. But this was almost just deciding where to take the story that was already happening.
Yeah, it's a perfect way to put it. I mean, every single night, because we, especially when they were out on the ice or whatnot, Dennis and I went back to a cabin to stay and recharge gear or whatnot. And every single night we'd sit there until, 11 p.m., 12 a.m., whatever, and just talk about it. Because this just happened during the day. We just discovered this about certain people. Now what? How do we then tell the story now? And it was like forever just changing as we found out certain things. And that is the art of documentary, right? And I love that experience. I mean, just getting to discuss it with you and figure out, okay, now how do we then bring more out of this and tell it in a way that the viewer is going to understand it and tell it in an impactful way and authentic way, and being ethical about everything that we're discovering. That was a very cool part of the process.
When you guys got back from that, how were you feeling about the project? Were you like, we have enough stuff? Or were you like, I think we still need to go shoot a couple more interviews? Like, where were you kind of at after that whole Minnesota expedition?
Oh yeah, when I got back, because things occurred out there and I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to go and get more information to help shape the story. So there's a lot more interviews that happen after the fact that then to help shape everything that happened. There's a couple of the people that we didn't go out and do pre-interviews with that I wasn't as close with, or I just didn't know. And then as things occurred on the expedition, it was, okay, let's set up a time. Let's go. Let's make some things happen. Yeah.
Because it almost left stories hanging, right? You discover so much in Minnesota. We talk with these people in the field, and then it's like, okay, well, now we need to follow this through. We need to see the rest. We need to figure out their experience and maybe fill in some gaps, right? And talk about maybe their history or maybe their future, right? In those interviews, and there were so many cool moments that I saw that they were recalling back to in the trip. And you know, I don't want to give too much away, but there were so many great individual stories from each person. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I think about it in terms of editing it, I think one of the things that made it really come together so well was just all the coverage that you guys did have, because I think it would be easy to get back from that expedition and be like, we got it, we got the interviews beforehand, you know, now let's put this thing together. But I think you did a really good job, Drew, of going out and getting those follow-up interviews, and like really that pulled the whole story together, is to see kind of, you know, where they were at before, how the expedition went, and then kind of the afterwards of like where their lives are going and kind of, you know, how that affected them. And I think that just really rounded out the entire documentary. And I think when you're putting together a documentary, that's probably one of the more daunting tasks, is just thinking about how many interviews we have to do, how many different just shoot days we have to do as extra pickup days to go get footage or go get little sound bites here and there. And I think one of the things that just led to the success of this is just there was so much of like stuff that you guys got before the expedition, stuff at the expedition, and then so much afterward that it just really made the editing of the whole thing come together a lot quicker. So
Nick, were there any moments or stories in particular that didn't make the edit?
all the stuff that made it in there was stuff that Drew and I talked about very early on, where we were like, oh, we want to kind of have this, you know, this part of the interview, or let's group these pieces of the interviews together.
Which was interesting. It started out at like 90 or 95 minutes, you know, beginning to end. And then we ended up chopping 30, 25 minutes off to then keep the pacing up to, cut out story that wasn't necessary to sharing the story of each of these people.
Was there a funny moment that you got to see, maybe like in the process of filming?
Yeah, there's definitely some funny moments, just like people having funny things that happened to them in the documentary, like especially stuff with the Tough Mudder. There was just some funny instances with that, and you're just getting so dirty and stuff there. So those were some fun moments there. And then at the expedition, there was just little funny moments that were occurring where people were kind of just getting pushed to their limits and, kind of joking around with each other at some of the lighthearted, moments on it. But on the flip side of that, there was also a lot of very, very emotional moments too. And I think kind of as we were putting it together, you kind of are almost removed from that, I would say, to an extent, because you're watching it so many times where you're hearing it. And then kind of when it starts to really come together and you're like, wow, like these are real people with real stories. And, it starts to really take shape as a bigger idea.
Walk me through your philosophy. I think with piecing really any piece together, but especially this documentary, there's a part of sound design in music choices. And what is your philosophy on how you used music to basically, pull audiences or viewers from one emotional field to the next? Well, how did you, because I think it's phenomenal. Every track that was used in that, in the documentary was amazing. So walk me through your philosophy on how you did that.
I think for me, when I'm picking out music, one of the most important things is setting the right tone. And that starts early on with you and I having discussions about, okay, like how do we want the viewer to feel through this part? And, sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be a discussion, because in the interview, we're picking up on the tone of, this is a really somber moment, or this is a really funny moment, or, you're kind of taking the cues from the interview to understand kind of the tone of it. And then you're also thinking about the greater story in general and, what's the overall story we're trying to tell, and kind of having music that fits in line with all of that. And so I think when I think about this documentary, it's, obviously very emotional, dramatic, but there's also an element of uplifting and a really an emotional undertone there too. So it's like you're watching kind of like this comeback story of all these characters as they overcome something. So I wanted to find music that was dramatic and intense for those right scenes, but then also those moments where they do accomplish something, or, something good does happen. We have those kind of releases of something that's more uplifting in the music. So that's kind of how I chose the different music pieces throughout it. And we kind of went back and forth just trying to, find all those right songs that really fit. But yeah, I agree. I think the music really does a good job of helping just tell the story and like set the right tone and mood for this overall documentary.
You know what I thought was super interesting with the editing too, that was a choice done by you, was one of the individuals that we followed, her name was Elisa, and she was telling her story. But a few years prior, I had filmed her doing boxing. She's at a boxing class. And as she was telling her story, you threw in that B-roll over the top of her story with some additional sound design. And those clips, which were more for like fun, engaging, you know, whatever, but paired with the music, paired with what she was saying, it gave that B-roll a totally different meaning. Like it gave it this, you know, this fighting feeling. It was completely different than what I filmed it as, the intention behind how I filmed it, but paired with everything that you did, it brought something new to it to life. It was incredible how that was done.
Yeah, thanks, man. One of the harder parts was finding scenes that could kind of transition from interview to interview. So I think you guys did a great job just like capturing a lot of B-roll that really made sense to those interviews. For example, one of my favorite scenes in the whole documentary is just, I think it's that morning of day 2 when they're on the ice and they're waking up, and you guys got a ton of great footage of just that, like the somber quietness of being out there in the morning, and you're seeing little icicles. You're kind of hearing, you know, the sounds of the Boundary Waters. And I felt like that was a great way to kind of transition into those scenes and just kind of lead into, you know, the next thing that they were going to talk about in the interviews. So yeah, it was cool.
I think we got to give a big shout out to Outward Bound too. Outward Bound was incredible. The instructors were incredible, and they all were cool to be a part of it and actually talk to us and give us some more insights. Justin and Emily, they were phenomenal people to work with while out there, and they gave us a lot of great, you know, leeway and kind of helped show us some things, and they were really great.
So with this documentary, you know, obviously the participants got to watch it, people in Recovery Beyond. How do you think that the documentary being there and showing their life, showing their stories impacts their future stories going forward?
Yeah. I think, you know, going back to then how we decided to go and follow the stories, we wanted to share a bit about where each person came from, them doing the thing, doing the expedition, and then what were they looking to accomplish and do after the fact. And man, it's like, it's so cool. There's so many great parts of the story, but I don't want to share them because it is a big part of the documentary. But seeing some, like, for example, there was an individual there that he was really wanting something to happen, and that happened at the showing of the documentary. And it was like, there has been so many big changes that they've been making, that they've been doing. And again, this is like, this whole experience for them was another brick, another layer of solid foundation that they can build from and progress from. And it's really, it is taking place to this day. It's almost like I want to go film more. I want to go like, dude, look at where you are now. Like even compared to what we were talking about before. Yeah, it looks like they've, you know, a lot of things have changed. And I think in terms of impactfulness, and especially the people that were there, which was a pretty cool experience at the showing in North Bend at the theater showing, we had like a Q&A session afterwards. So we were up on stage and some of the audience members got to ask questions. And there was one gentleman that stood up that began crying because of he was dealing with certain circumstances where he was coming from, and that this was like, it allowed him to see like other people are also in certain situations and doing better for themselves. And it gave him hope and, you know, impacted him in a way, which is why what this whole documentary is really for, is to have that impact with for people that are also in the same boat. I mean, even not coming from a drug, you know, abuse or things like that, we all can connect in terms of a situation where, you know, there's hard things that we deal with in life that if we have that, you know, inspiration or that motivation to be more, be better, be a better husband, be a better dad, to grow from whatever we've come from. I mean, that's what's powerful about it.
One thing that I really connected with was just kind of what you're saying too, is just it's like these people had such challenging lives and so many things that they couldn't even control that were affecting their lives and making it so hard. And it's like they overcame that. They went out there and did that. And it kind of made some of the things that, you know, the problems and things I've dealt with in my own life kind of pale in comparison, where I'm like, oh my gosh, like if they can go out and do something like this and challenge themselves and, you know, put themselves out there and be vulnerable, I'm like, I can do hard things as well, you know? So I think that's kind of a message that anyone can connect with in the documentary, is just like, especially seeing these people who have had such challenging circumstances kind of rise to the challenge and then overcome it. That's inspirational to whoever watches it, you know? And I think that's one of the best parts about the documentary.
Huge shout out to Recovery Beyond and the mission that they're doing, because that is what they're setting out to do. And they do it through these outdoor events and creating this community of people that have had, you know, where they are living in recovery, and their whole motto is, what if living in recovery was just another word for living? And so that's their whole mission, is to build these communities, to really bring people in from those life experiences and to go out and do these things, to then show them, hey, there's other fun events to do out there. There's other ways to live life, and here's a way to do it. And so huge shout out to that organization, especially for bringing us on to capture the story and help share their mission. Really thankful for them and what they're doing, and for them bringing us in on this project.
What's next for them? What are they going to do in the future? Do they have more people coming in, or, you know, how has the documentary impacted their organization?
Yeah, so they're using the documentary to share, you know, a part of their mission, a part of their heart, to then bring awareness to their organization, so that should other people see it or also want to be then involved in communities like what Recover Beyond is building, that then they can go and connect with them. And so Recover Beyond is definitely taking this to grow the members that are part of it, as well as people that want to just, you know, give their time to also come in and help out with them for events, setting up more events, going out and doing more activities outside, and creating, you know, more experiences for people to connect with and build that community with.
Yeah. I got one for you, Dennis. It's your first documentary. What was kind of your experience as a cinematographer, you know, approaching this? Like, what were the kind of things you were thinking about? What were some things you learned from this process?
It was a big mindset shift for me coming into this. You know, it's a different work of the camera. You're filming handheld. You're talking to people while you're filming, and kind of building that relationship off camera as well. So I think if there's anything that I learned in this whole process for myself as a filmmaker, is just how important building that relationship is off camera, so that when the camera is there, you know, it's not intimidating, it's not uncomfortable. And when you kind of establish that relationship early on, and really care to learn about people, learn about their experiences and talk to them, then when the camera comes up, it's, you know, it's easy, it's no big deal. And they're able to be vulnerable and really share what they're actually feeling. Because I know for people I've worked with before, you know, you come in, you're like, all right, let's do this thing, like we're gonna get you on camera, and they can be reserved, they can be nervous, but when you spend time with them, you're with them for multiple days in a row, and you're actually engaging in the stories in the event, and people really just open up. So I learned a lot from that, and just, you know, dealing with people, dealing with their emotions and sensitivities. It's kind of an art to just make them feel comfortable. That way we can get a really good result on camera. But I think filming documentaries is such a special and unique thing. I really want to do more of them, because it's impactful. And when you can see the shots that you got on a big screen with people enjoying them, and really taking a story home away for themselves, not just admiring the beauty of the art, the filming and the art that went into it, but really being impacted by a story, it beats everything else. It beats everything that goes into production. If the story resonates with the viewer, that is the ultimate goal. And seeing that happen through the camera work, through the long conversations that Drew and I had of, you know, how do we lead this story forward? It's such a story-driven piece when it comes to documentaries, that it just rises above all of the other production things that go on.
How did you kind of build up the story initially, even before we started editing? Were you kind of like, I have a general idea of where I want this to go, or kind of where was your head at prior to really editing this thing?
I talked with Chris and about it actually way before, after we filmed the 2 events, and that's where we kind of went off on this trail of like, the beginning, middle, end of like where they are now, or where were they previously, where are they, right now doing their thing, and then really where is it that they want to go, because that's the why, right? And attaching that why to this story is what really creates the impact, because we all have a certain why we go after, but sometimes it's hard to find. Sometimes we don't think about it. Sometimes it's not at the top of our head, but the more that you can discover that, oh my gosh, like that's where the story starts to really take hold and become something of impact, of something that's, drawing, that I want to know more on. So that's really where it came from. And I agree 100% with Dennis, is story is everything. And I think I learned that more on this project, where this story is everything. It doesn't matter what cameras you use. Nothing matters as long if the story is great, then everything else is secondary. And then I think if you start with story first, then it's cool, because then Dennis and I can, on the filming side of things, can then bring our creative art into it and use different camera techniques, epic cameras like the Reds, and create really beautiful imagery. But we start from the story, not end with the story. And then that's what makes everything else so much better.
I think you did a good job too, just even during the editing. Like there was many times where I'm like cutting a scene, it's a little long, and then you're like, I think we can cut this, or like, I think we can cut this a little bit. And I'm like, all right, yeah, like we can't probably cut this. Cause it's like, you have to be so focused in on like the granular scenes, but also the bigger picture of like, how does this relate to the whole thing? Is this really important? And when you are doing a documentary, it's like, you have to just keep it, focused on what the story is that we're trying to get across.
I was reading that in a book where if there's lines that do not have any significance to the actual story, you cut it. That's it. There's no questions asked. It doesn't matter if it took you a long time to film those scenes or whatever. You cut it and you keep it to the story and only the story, and that is it. Because that's ultimately then what creates the pacing, which I thought, this was interesting. When you watch your own work with other people watching it, it's a totally different experience, right? And I know we all felt this at the theater release, watching our work with 180 plus people in the audience. And something that I was sweating bullets, right? And I know you were, like, we were just waiting for something bad to happen. But what I felt while watching is the pacing was spot on. There was no wasted time on anything. So I thought that was a phenomenal job that we ended up getting to. And it was hard to get to that point.
Yeah, completely. I would say the same thing. I think that was one of the stronger parts about it, is it really started, and then there was no kind of like lulls or like long drawn out scenes. Everything was just kind of fast paced, but we let those moments where it needed to go a little bit longer. And I completely agree. When I was watching in the theater, I'm just like, oh man, like hope it plays well here, and hopefully the audience gets what we're going after. And I think they totally did. I mean, we were having people who were crying there, who were having super emotional reactions to, something that we put together. So that was an awesome experience to see.
It was my first time seeing the documentary, finished. Because I had seen kind of a rough cut when
early on
we got together,
super rough. Yeah.
It was really rough, and we didn't the story was there, right? But it wasn't complete. And seeing it for the first time, I think I might have cried a couple times, because I was seeing the story on the screen, but I knew the people, and I spent time with them, and so I really felt it.
Totally.
And it came through in the editing.
Yeah. You did a good job kind of having a baseline structure, I thought, for the edit when I first came in on the project. And then what was nice is you kind of just let me go in there and kind of start adding in different things and kind of seeing how it played out, and then giving me little bits of direction here and there. And then when we really started to get into the finer details, or the more small edits, that we needed to make, then it was like we were already at such a good base of where the story was that I felt like that helped it come together pretty quickly. So,
Drew, when can people expect to see this documentary? When's it going to get a public release, and where's it going, after today?
Yeah. Right now, we are going to do a couple more theater releases. I think we got one scheduled in Tacoma Bill from Recover Beyond is really heading that up, and he wants to get a couple more out in Seattle. So that should be coming in the next few months. We are going through film festivals, which I'm actually leaving today at 7 p.m. to go down to Riverside to go hit one of the film festivals that it's in. There's 9 other ones that we're waiting to hear back for that are around the country. So that's going to go over this year. After it goes through all the film festivals, then we are looking to get it to Prime so that people can then stream it from Prime and be able to see it that way. So super excited about that. And we'll just kind of keep everybody posted, especially on the next Seattle releases, for people to go see it in theaters for the first time. Well, guys, thank you for jumping on this podcast. It was an absolute blast and a great experience working with the both of you. You brought so much creativity and so much, we couldn't have done it without you two. And I'm so excited for the future projects that we're going to, I know we'll be doing together here in the future. And what a phenomenal job. So thank you all for jumping in on this project. The 3 of us, putting it together and making it all happen. It's an incredible feat.
All right, where can we find your work, Drew?
You can find it at, freestyleproduction.com and go see a bunch of our work and some of the short films that are out there. You can also find it on YouTube and whatnot.
My name is Dennis, owner of Peak 3 Visuals video production company.
And I'm Nick. You can find me at Nick Joyce Media.